So, Professor Vardarajan, as a faculty member and scholar engaged with education for so many years, could you share with us what have been some of your experiences and interactions that led you to feel the need to build the Schoolbooks Archives at our university?
I think there is a story to be told in the way the initial stages led to the idea of an archive. One could go back to early 2014 when Wipro Applying Thought in schools, the organization was about to hold their annual partners meet, and for that particular year they had decided to focus on teaching learning materials in schools as the focal point of discussion among educationists, partner organizations and so on. Now this gave us an opportunity to curate a very small exhibition, and they were very happy to do that, to allow us to hold such an exhibition during the 3-day meet. It was a very small exhibition. We had about 60-70 books, and we could display only about 50. And most of these books that we could display, they were all from the 19th century and a few from the first 2-3 decades of the 20th century. Now, for those who were attending this partners meet, for a good number of them, they had read literature on the history of textbooks, but this was perhaps the first time they were getting to see some of these books, before them, what it looked like, what were the people who were writing, how were they produced, and so on and so forth. So it did generate some interest among those who attended the partners meet. But there were a few individuals who sort of pushed us with a lot of questions. I should mention a couple of names here. One was Professor Jayashree Ramdas, who at that point in time was the director of Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education. And we had very few books in biology at that point in time. And she was asking, okay, what about biology books in other languages in different periods and time, and so on and so forth. So that set us to think that, okay, we need more we need to collect more on this subject from different periods in time, and so that's one aspect. But then there were I think there were 3 books which were all Marathi readers, and they were titled Marathi Reader 1, Marathi Reader 6, Marathi Reader 5 and Marathi Reader 7. Now she began to ask us to find out whether it was possible to trace it all the way back to what would have been the first Marathi reader like, what would have been the 8th or 9th Marathi reader like. So they were trying to tell us that, look, we need, when we are collecting something, we also need to see, okay, what would have been, how they sort of fit in a sequence of books and so on. Okay. Now the point that she was also raising, the question that she was asking us to probe was significant, because those who had already written about textbooks, which educationists were using quite a lot, they remained either very general surveys or using a small set of books for analysis and so on. But given that public education, mass education has a history of 200 years, this had to cover a large variety of materials in different languages, on different subjects and so on. So that already opened up the need to collect more and more. The other person who took enormous interest in what was being displayed there was Arvind Sardana, who was with Eklavya Bhopal till very recently. He had similar questions to ask, but he was also curious to know is there a way in which we can understand the evolution of textbook as we understand today? Was it always like this in all through these 200 years? So, or whether a systematic attempt to collect more and more of these books will help you destabilize the idea that we are so near to us and we think that this is what a textbook should look like. So there were many such questions. But both these individuals also asked us to get in touch with many others who had done substantial amount of work. And that is what led us to speak with Professor T.V. Venkateswaran, Dr. T.V. Venkateswaran, Professor K. Subramaniam, C.N. Subramaniam, Subbu, and they asked us to look at many other sources which would give us some idea about the kind of books that would have been produced. One was the printed catalogues of early 20th century, which the British Museum Library had compiled, the thick volumes, but they had listed almost every book that had been published in different languages, different subjects, and so on. So this is a mine of information that at least gave us an idea as to what are the things that we could look for. Now this was a big leap for us, because when we curated this exhibition, we were pretty much relying on what we came across, and we had not made a systematic attempt towards looking for things. But these pointers also told us, okay, what were the other things that that we could look for. And they were also and these were the very individuals who told us that, look, many of these most interesting literature on school books, textbooks, whatever you may want to call it at this stage, had also been looked at by scholars working in other areas, for instance, book historians. So they sort of, expanded the universe that we could now navigate and then thereby collect material for us. Now, after this, what is exhibited, but it is important to note that at this point, creating an archive, putting them all together in one place, I don't think we had ever thought of this. It was a matter of collecting, and also because a lot of people were looking for such material, sending them to them, but there were also people who were constantly sending us books. So it remained at that stage. Now, 2 years later, the Contemporary Education Society of India was to have a conference, their annual conference at Azim Premji University in Bangalore. That gave us an opportunity to curate another exhibition, by which time we had more books to display. And there were a lot of younger scholars, doctoral students, teachers, and many, representatives from many organizations who took a lot of interest in what was being displayed. And then on, the number of queries for more and more such materials began to increase in large numbers. But they also told us, okay, why are we not looking at, the collection at that till that time was largely historical material, 19th century, early 20th century, and so on. But they also asked us to look at what were textbooks like, in say 1950s, 1960s. You had some idea about what these books, who were the authors, and so on. But we did not have a substantial number in our collection. So we began to look actively for books, say in the post-independence period, and so on. Within a year, we had another exhibition at the Regional Science Museum in Bhopal. So these events got us to speak with a large number of individuals who had been worrying about these issues or were curious to know about them, but they were also trying to tell us that what are the kind of things that we should look at. And it was through these discussions that we began to realize that textbooks have had a major role to play, but when we are collecting these books, we must not think that textbooks alone or independent entities should be treated as independent entities. They occupy a space within a network of say the forces that determine them, the documents that were produced which will explain why this book was written at this point. So that's what led us to look at, okay, more and more curriculum documents should be collected, more and more teacher education material relating to these books that were being introduced in the schools. How did this get reflected in the teacher education material? What kind of books were being written for teachers who would use this material, or how should they be using this material, and so on and so forth. And these very individuals also told us that one of the ways in which we can get a much better sense of how textbooks were to be used, the kind of discussions that took place on how teachers could be used, was to look at teacher magazines that had a very long history. That's an area that we still haven't studied much, or an area that we should look at. So they in fact contained substantial discussions on how books should be written. So all of these discussions led to that. Now we also began to realize that there is with such rich material waiting to be collected, organized and made available, we began to realize how such an attempt would substantially nuance how we understand textbooks. Its long process of evolution as a very idea or a genre, the processes that have also evolved over time, the utter variety that we see, the number of agencies or different types of organizations that have been introduced. So that was an exciting period, the formative period that led us to think that, okay, now we have to get on with the task of creating an archive.